The Veloxi had never known war. For 10,000 years, their civilization had grown in peace. Their cities rose like crystals from the ground, tall and beautiful, catching the light of their twin suns. Their forests glowed with soft blue and green lights at night. Their people, gentle insectoid creatures with 4 arms and large, kind eyes, had built their society on trade and friendship. They had no weapons. They had no soldiers. They had never needed them. High Chancellor HFY stood at the great window of the council chamber and watched the sky burn. She was old, even by Veloxi standards. Her shell had turned silver with age, and her wings had not carried her in flight for many years. But her mind was still sharp, and her heart still beat strong. Today, both of those hearts were filled with fear. "How many ships?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but her 4 hands trembled slightly. Elder Crix moved to stand beside her. He was younger than HFY, but not by much. His compound eyes reflected the orange glow of the fires falling from the sky. "Our observers count 600 vessels, High Chancellor. Perhaps more. They are still arriving. 600 ships. The Veloxi Confederacy owned perhaps 50 vessels in total, and none of them were built for fighting. They were cargo ships, transport vessels, science stations, nothing that could stand against what was coming. The Kethari had arrived. HFY had heard stories of the Kethari all her life. Every species in the galaxy had heard the stories. They were reptilian creatures, tall and powerful, with scales like armor and claws like knives. They had no interest in trade or friendship. They wanted only one thing: conquest. 17 civilizations had fallen to the Kethari in the last 1,000 years. 17 species had been conquered, enslaved, or destroyed. The Kethari moved through the galaxy like a plague, taking everything they wanted and burning what they did not need. Now they had come for the Veloxi. "Have they made contact?" HFY asked. "Yes, High Chancellor." Crix's voice was heavy with grief. "Their commander sent a message 1 hour ago. He said we have 2 choices. We can surrender and serve them as slaves, or we can resist and die." HFY closed her eyes. Around her, the other elders sat in silence. Some of them wept. Some of them prayed to old gods that the Veloxi had not worshipped in centuries. None of them spoke, because none of them knew what to say. What could they say? The Veloxi had no army. They had no weapons. They had spent 10,000 years believing that peace was possible, that friendship was stronger than violence, that the galaxy was a place of wonder and cooperation. They had been wrong. A massive explosion shook the council chamber. Through the window, HFY saw one of their orbital stations fall from the sky, trailing fire and smoke. Thousands of Veloxi had lived on that station. Scientists, teachers, families, children, all gone in an instant. "High Chancellor," another elder spoke up. Her name was Vreen, and she was the youngest member of the council. "There may be one option we have not considered." HFY turned to look at her. "Speak." Vreen reached into her robe and pulled out a small device. It was old, very old. The metal was scratched and worn, and the symbols on its surface were in a language that no living Veloxi could read, but HFY recognized it immediately. "The beacon." "No," Elder Crix said at once. His voice was sharp with fear. "We cannot. The assembly warned us. They told us to use that device only in absolute desperation, only when all other hope was lost." "Look outside, Crix," Vreen replied. "Our cities are burning. Our people are dying. If this is not absolute desperation, then what is?" "You do not understand what you are asking," Crix insisted. "Do you know who will answer that beacon? Do you know what manner of creatures will come?" "I know the stories," Vreen said quietly. "Everyone knows the stories." HFY took the beacon from Vreen's hands. It was heavier than it looked, as if it carried the weight of some terrible decision inside it. The Galactic Assembly had given this device to the Veloxi 300 years ago, along with a warning. The beacon would summon help, but the help it summoned would come from a species that the Assembly had locked away from the rest of the galaxy. A species so dangerous, so unpredictable, so utterly terrifying that the other races had decided it was better to contain them than to fight them. The humans. HFY had never met a human. Very few living creatures had. They had been quarantined in their own section of the galaxy for centuries, given 100 star systems to call their own in exchange for one simple promise: stay away from everyone else. But the agreement had included one exception. If any member species of the Galactic Assembly activated an emergency beacon, humanity was permitted to respond. It was, the Assembly had explained, a kind of safety valve, a last resort for the most desperate situations. "The stories say they are monsters," Crix whispered. Worse than the Kethari. Worse than anything. The stories say many things, Yuriksa replied. She looked down at the beacon in her hands, then looked out at her burning world. Another explosion rocked the city, somewhere in the distance. She could hear screaming. What choice do we have? She asked. We can die with certainty. Or we can take a chance on uncertainty. Perhaps the humans are monsters. Perhaps they will be worse than the Kethari. But perhaps, just perhaps, they will be something else. She pressed the button on the beacon. For a moment, nothing happened. The device grew warm in her hands, and a soft light pulsed beneath its surface. Then the light faded, and the beacon went cold. It is done, Yuriksa said. Now we wait. How long? Vreen asked. I do not know. Hours. Days. Perhaps they will not come at all. Yuriksa set the beacon down on the council table and turned back to the window. The Kethari ships were descending now, landing troops on the surface. Soon the ground war would begin, and the Veloxi who had never held weapons, never trained for battle, never even imagined such violence would be swept away like leaves in a storm. High Chancellor, Crick said softly. What have you done? Yuriksa did not answer. She watched her world burn, and she wondered if she had just saved her people, or doomed them to something even worse. The sky continued to fall, and somewhere, far across the galaxy, in a region of space that most species tried very hard to forget existed, a signal was received. Alarms began to sound. Soldiers began to move. Ships began to wake from their long sleep. The beacon had been activated. Humanity was coming. Supreme Commander Vex Torak stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the Veloxi world die beneath him. It was a beautiful sight. The fires spread across the continents like blooming flowers, and the smoke rose up to paint the sky in shades of gray and orange. Another easy victory. Vex Torak was tall, even for a Kethari. He stood nearly 4 meters high, his scales thick and dark green, his eyes yellow and cold. He had led the Kethari war fleet for 30 years, and in that time he had conquered 11 worlds. The Veloxi would be his 12th. Report, he growled. His second in command, a scarred warrior named Drextal, stepped forward. Ground forces have secured 3 major cities, Supreme Commander. Resistance is minimal. These creatures do not even know how to fight. Of course they do not, Vex Torak replied. They are prey. They have always been prey. They simply did not know it until we arrived. The bridge crew laughed at this. It was a harsh sound, like rocks grinding together. The Kethari did not laugh often, but they enjoyed seeing weakness in other species. It reminded them of their own strength. How long until complete occupation? Vex Torak asked. 2 days, perhaps 3. Their underground shelters are well built, but they will not hold forever. Once we break through, the remaining population will surrender or die. Good. Vex Torak turned away from the viewport and settled into his command chair. Wake me when something interesting happens. The bridge fell into a comfortable silence. Officers monitored their stations, tracking the progress of ground forces and orbital bombardment. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Everything was normal. Then young Sithrak spoke up. Sithrak was different from the other Kethari officers. He was smaller, thinner, and his scales were a lighter shade of green. He had earned his position not through combat strength but through his mind. He was a strategist, a planner, and he had a habit of asking questions that others preferred to ignore. Supreme Commander, Sithrak said, our sensors detected an unusual energy signature approximately 1 hour ago. Vex Torak opened one eye. Unusual how? It was a transmission of some kind, very brief, very powerful. It appeared to originate from the planet's surface and was directed toward the outer galaxy. A distress call, Drextal said dismissively. The prey is crying for help. Let them cry. No one will answer. Perhaps, Sithrak replied. But the signal's destination was unusual. It was aimed at a region of space known as the Human Quarantine Zone. The bridge went quiet. Not the comfortable silence of before, but something else. Something heavier. Vex Torak sat up slowly. The Human Quarantine Zone, he repeated. Are you certain? Yes, Supreme Commander. For a long moment, no one spoke. Vex Torak looked around the bridge and saw something he rarely saw in Kethari eyes. Uncertainty. Superstition, Drextal said at last. His voice was loud, forceful, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. The humans are a myth, a story that the elder races tell to frighten children. The humans are not a myth, Sithrak said quietly. They are real. The Galactic Assembly has maintained their quarantine for over 300 years. Then they are prisoners. Drextel replied. Weak creatures locked away for the safety of the galaxy. If they were truly dangerous, why would they allow themselves to be contained? Sithrak tilted his head. Do you know the story of how they were contained, Commander? Drextel did not answer. I have studied the records, Sithrak continued. The old records, from before the quarantine. The humans were not defeated in war. They were not threatened into submission. They were offered a deal. What kind of deal? Vextorak asked. The Assembly gave them 100 star systems. Told them they could do whatever they wished within those borders, as long as they never crossed them. The humans agreed. Do you know why? No one answered. Because they were bored, Sithrak said. They had run out of things to fight on their own world. They had conquered every environment, killed every predator, tamed every creature that could be tamed. When they reached space, they started fighting each other instead. The Assembly's offer gave them room to spread out, room to explore, room to continue their endless wars among themselves. Vextorak leaned forward. You speak as if you admire them. I speak as someone who has read the records, Supreme Commander. The humans evolved on a death world. Their planet is a nightmare of extreme temperatures, poisonous plants, deadly animals, and unstable ground that shakes and cracks without warning. Their sun bombards them with radiation. Their weather systems can destroy entire cities. Many species come from harsh worlds. Drextel interrupted. Not like this one. Sithrak replied. On most harsh worlds, species evolve to survive, to hide, to avoid danger. Humans evolve differently. They evolve to hunt, to chase, to pursue prey across any distance, any terrain, any obstacle, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. He paused, letting this sink in. They are called persistence predators. They do not run fast. They do not have natural weapons. They do not have armor, or venom, or camouflage. But they have something more dangerous. They never stop. They will chase prey for hours, for days, across deserts and mountains and rivers. They do not give up. They do not get tired. They simply keep coming, and coming, and coming, until their target cannot run anymore. Drextel shifted uncomfortably. These are just stories. These are recorded facts, Sithrak replied. And that is only the beginning. Humans domesticated wolves, pack predators with teeth like knives, and turned them into loyal companions. They mastered fire before they mastered tools. They consume neurotoxins for pleasure and call them spices. They drink poisons for recreation and call them alcohol. They survive injuries that would kill any other species. And they consider this normal. The bridge was very quiet now. When the Galactic Assembly first encountered humanity, Sithrak continued, they sent a delegation to establish peaceful contact. The delegation arrived during something the humans called a world war. Humans were killing each other by the millions, using weapons of terrible power, fighting over ideas and resources and land. The delegation left immediately and recommended permanent quarantine. Vextorak stared at the young officer. Why are you telling us this? Because if the Veloxi have sent a signal to the human quarantine zone, then the humans may respond. And if they respond, Supreme Commander, we need to be prepared for what is coming. Drextel laughed, but the sound was hollow. Prepared? We are the Kethari. We have conquered 17 civilizations. What can these humans do that we cannot handle? Sithrak looked at him with something that might have been pity. The elder races have a saying, Commander. They say that the Kethari are the monsters that the galaxy fears, but the humans are the monsters that the monsters fear. Vextorak rose from his chair and walked to the viewport. Below him, the Veloxi world burned. His fleet surrounded it like a net of steel and fire. 600 ships, crewed by warriors who had never known defeat. I do not believe in stories, he said. I believe in strength, and we are strong. He turned back to his crew. Continue the assault. If the humans come, we will show them what real monsters look like. But as he spoke, Vextorak noticed something strange. His hands were shaking. He hid them behind his back and hoped no one had seen. 3 days had passed since the beacon was activated. High Chancellor Urixah had stopped counting the dead. The numbers were too large, too terrible, too impossible to hold in her mind. She sat in an underground bunker beneath what had once been the capital city, surrounded by the survivors of her council and the few civilians they had managed to save. The bunker was cold and dark. The power systems had failed yesterday, and now they relied on emergency lights that flickered and buzzed. Water was running low. Food was nearly gone. Above them, the Kethari ground forces were searching for survivors, and their heavy footsteps could be heard through the ceiling like thunder. The beacon failed, Elder Crick said. He sat in the corner, His wings folded tightly against his body. He had not moved in hours. No one is coming. We are going to die here. Yurikza did not respond. She had no words left. She had spent 3 days hoping, praying, watching her world burn, and now she felt empty. Perhaps Crix was right. Perhaps no one was coming. Perhaps the humans had received the signal and simply decided not to respond. Or perhaps the humans were not real at all. Perhaps they were just a story, a myth, a false hope that the galaxy told itself to feel safer in the dark. A young Veloxy communications officer burst into the room. Her name was Tillix, and she was barely more than a child. She had been crying earlier, but now her eyes were wide with something else. "High Chancellor," she gasped. "Our deep sensors, the backup ones, they are detecting something." Yurikza looked up slowly. "Detecting what?" "Ships, High Chancellor. Many ships. They are entering the system from fold space." "More Kethari?" Crix asked bitterly. "No." Tillix's voice trembled. "The energy signatures are different. They do not match any known species in our database. They are coming from the direction of the quarantine zone." Yurikza stood up so fast that she nearly fell. Her old legs ached, but she did not care. She pushed past the others and followed Tillix to the communications room, where a single working sensor screen showed what was happening in orbit. She stopped. She stared. She forgot to breathe. Ships were appearing in space above Varath Prime. Not one ship. Not 10 ships. Hundreds of ships, pouring out of fold space in perfect formation. Their hulls dark and angular. Their weapons already glowing with power. They were ugly ships. There was no grace to them, no elegance, no beauty. They looked like they had been built for one purpose and one purpose only: violence. They were covered with guns and armor and engines, and they moved through space like predators closing in on prey. "How many?" Yurikza whispered. 200 confirmed, High Chancellor. Possibly more. They are still arriving. 200 ships, against 600 Kethari vessels. Those were terrible odds, but the Veloxy had nothing. Any ally was better than none. "Are they receiving communications?" Yurikza asked. "They are broadcasting on all frequencies, High Chancellor. Open channel. They want everyone to hear." A voice filled the room. It was a female voice, calm and steady, speaking in a language that the translation systems had to work hard to process. The words came through clearly enough, but there was something underneath them, something hard and sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "This is Admiral Helena Zhang of the Terran Response Fleet. We received your emergency beacon 3 days ago. Sorry for the delay, we had to wake up some ships that haven't flown in a while. We are here to assist. Please remain in shelter and keep your heads down. Things are about to get loud." Yurikza felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not know if they were tears of relief, or fear, or something else entirely. The humans were real. The humans had come. But what exactly had she invited to her world? On the Kethari flagship, Supreme Commander Vex Torak stood before the main viewport and watched the human fleet arrive. His scales had gone pale, a sign of extreme stress that he could not control. "Impossible," he breathed. "How did they get here so fast?" "Fold space technology," Sithrak replied. His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that sounded almost like satisfaction. "The humans have been improving their engines for 300 years. They had nothing else to do." "Sir," the communications officer spoke up, "the human flagship is hailing us. Put them through." The view screen flickered, and then Vex Torak saw a human for the first time in his life. Admiral Helena Zhang was small. Impossibly small. She could not have been more than 2 meters tall, with soft skin the color of light brown wood and black hair cut short. Her eyes were dark and calm, and she sat in her command chair as if this were a routine patrol rather than a confrontation with 600 enemy warships. "Commander," she said. Her voice was polite, almost friendly. "I am Admiral Zhang. You seem to be attacking a species that has asked for our help. I am going to need you to stop." Vex Torak bared his teeth. It was a threat display, a show of dominance that had made countless enemies tremble. "You are outnumbered 3 to 1, human. Your threats are meaningless." Zhang smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve of her lips, but something about it made Vex Torak's blood run cold. "Commander," she said, "I need you to understand something. We did not bring 200 ships because we needed them. We brought 200 ships because that is how many crews volunteered to miss dinner." She leaned forward slightly. "Now, I am going to give you one chance to withdraw. Take your fleet and leave this system. Never return. If you do this, everyone gets to go home alive. If you do not..." She paused. "Well, let us just say that my people have been waiting for an excuse to stretch their legs. Vex Torek felt his hands trembling again. He clenched them into fists and forced himself to speak. You think you can threaten me? I am Supreme Commander of the Kethari War Fleet. I have conquered 11 worlds. I have crushed species far more powerful than yours. I know, Zhang replied. I read your file on the way here. Impressive resume. But here is the thing, Commander. You have spent your career fighting prey, civilians, pacifists, creatures who had forgotten what violence was. Her smile widened. We never forgot. She cut the communication. For a long moment, the Kethari bridge was silent. Then Drextal spoke. Sir, should we? The first salvo hit before he could finish the sentence. The human ships fired together, 200 vessels acting as a single weapon. Their targeting was perfect. Their timing was flawless. 6 Kethari battlecruisers died in the first 11 seconds, their shields overwhelmed, their hulls torn apart, their crews vaporized before they even knew what was happening. Vex Torek stumbled backward. Alarm screamed. The lights flickered. Through the viewport, he could see his fleet, his beautiful, invincible fleet beginning to burn. Return fire, he roared. All ships, return fire. The Kethari weapons blazed. Hundreds of cannons fired at once, filling space with deadly energy, but the human ships were already moving, scattering and regrouping, dancing through the barrage like they could see the future, and they kept firing. How are they so fast? Drextal shouted. How are they targeting us so accurately? Sithrak stood at his station, his eyes fixed on his instruments. They are not just shooting at us, Commander. They are hunting us, isolating weak ships, targeting damaged vessels. They are not fighting a battle. He looked up, and his face was pale. They are conducting a hunt. Through the viewport, the sky burned with the light of dying ships. And for the first time in his long career, Supreme Commander Vex Torek understood what it felt like to be prey. Observer Valis had been a scientist before the invasion. She had studied plants and insects, spending her days in the quiet forests of Vareth Prime, cataloging species that glowed in the dark and flowers that sang when the wind touched them. She had never seen violence. She had never imagined it. Now she crouched in the ruins of her laboratory, watching monsters fight monsters. The human dropships had come down like meteors, burning through the atmosphere and slamming into the ground near Kethari positions. Velis had expected the humans to set up defensive lines, to build walls and wait for the enemy to come to them. That was what made sense. That was what any reasonable species would do. But the humans did not do that. They came out of their ships running, not away from the Kethari, toward them. Velis had attached herself to a squad of human soldiers, marines. They called themselves, who had allowed her to follow at a safe distance. They said they wanted someone to document what happened. They said the galaxy should know. Now she understood why. The squad leader was a woman named Sergeant Chen. She was small, like all humans, barely reaching Velis's shoulder. Her skin was a light pink color, and her hair was the color of fire. She carried a weapon that was almost as long as she was tall, and she moved through the ruined city like she had been born there. Contact left, one of her soldiers called out. 4 Kethari, moving through the plaza. Chen raised her hand, and the squad stopped. They did not hide. They did not retreat. They simply waited. The Kethari came around the corner, their scales gleaming in the firelight, their weapons raised. They were huge, 3 times the size of any human, and their claws left grooves in the stone as they walked. They saw the humans. They roared and charged. What happened next took less than 10 seconds. The humans fired together, their weapons making sharp cracking sounds that echoed off the buildings. The first 2 Kethari fell immediately. Holes burned through their armor. The third managed to get close enough to swing his massive claws at Sergeant Chen. She ducked under the blow, stepped inside his reach, and pressed her weapon against his chest. She fired 3 times. The Kethari fell. The 4th tried to run. Martinez, Chen said calmly. He is yours. One of the other humans, a young man with dark skin and a quiet smile, raised his weapon and took aim. The Kethari was already 50 meters away and moving fast. Martinez fired once. The Kethari stumbled. He fired again. The Kethari fell and did not get up. Clear, Martinez said. That was almost too easy. Do not get comfortable, Chen replied. There are a lot more where those came from. Velis stared at the bodies on the ground. 4 Kethari warriors. The same creatures who had conquered 17 civilizations, who had burned her world, who had killed millions of her people, dead in seconds. How? She whispered. How did you do that? Chen looked at her with those strange flat eyes that humans had. Practice, she said simply. Lots of practice. They moved deeper into the city. The sounds of battle were everywhere now, explosions and screams and the sharp crack of human weapons. Velis saw things she would never forget. She saw a human soldier take a plasma bolt to the shoulder. The wound was terrible, blackened and smoking, and Velis expected the human to fall. Instead, he pulled out a small device, pressed it against the wound, and activated it. There was a hiss and a smell of burning flesh. The human grunted, then stood up and kept fighting. "Sergeant," he called out, "I am going to need a new shirt when this is over." The other humans laughed, as if getting shot was a joke. She saw another soldier, a woman even smaller than Chen Corner, a Kethari warrior, in an alley. The warrior was twice her height and 3 times her weight. When her weapon jammed, she did not run. She did not call for help. She threw down the useless gun, pulled a knife from her belt, and charged. Velis could not watch. She covered her eyes and listened to the sounds of combat growls and screams, and the wet sound of a blade cutting through flesh. When the sound stopped, she looked up. The human was standing over the Kethari's body, breathing hard, covered in green blood that was not her own. There was a deep cut on her arm, but she was smiling. "Tough bastard," she said. Then she wiped her knife on her pants and rejoined the squad. But the worst part, the part that would haunt Velis for the rest of her life, was what happened when the Kethari started to run. Word had spread through the Kethari forces. The humans were not normal enemies. They were something else. Something wrong. They did not fight like civilized species. They did not form lines or follow rules or accept surrender. They hunted, they stalked, they chased, and they never, ever stopped. Velis watched a group of Kethari warriors flee from a building, throwing down their weapons and running as fast as their legs could carry them. They were fast, much faster than any human could run. Surely they would escape. The humans did not chase them. Not at first. They simply watched, tracking the fleeing enemies with their eyes, noting which direction they went. "Persistence protocol authorized," a voice said over the communication system. It was Admiral Zhang, speaking from orbit. "All units, you are cleared for extended pursuit. Show them what we are." Chen smiled. It was not a nice smile. "You heard the Admiral," she said. "Let us go for a jog." The humans began to run. Not fast, not compared to the Kethari, but steady, constant, unchanging. Velis followed as long as she could, but eventually she had to stop. Her legs burned, her lungs ached. She collapsed against a wall and watched the humans disappear into the distance. Still running, still following, still hunting. She learned later what had happened. The Kethari had run for 8 kilometers before their bodies gave out. They were sprinters, built for short bursts of speed. When they slowed down, the humans caught up. When they sped up again, the humans fell behind, but only for a moment, and then they caught up again. This went on for hours. By the end, the Kethari were crawling. Some of them were crying. They begged for mercy, for rest, for death, anything to make it stop. The humans gave them a choice: surrender or keep running. They all surrendered. On the flagship, Supreme Commander Vex Torak listened to the reports from the surface. His fleet was broken, half his ships destroyed, the rest retreating to the edge of the system. His ground forces were being hunted through the ruins of the very cities they had conquered. "They are not soldiers," one of his commanders reported, his voice shaking. "They are predators. They do not fight to win. They fight to consume. Our warriors are losing their minds down there. They see humans everywhere. They hear footsteps in the dark. They cannot sleep. They cannot rest. The humans are always coming." Vex Torak closed his eyes. Sithrak had been right. The stories had been true. The humans were not the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They were not the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced. They were something worse. They were patient, and somewhere in the distance, getting closer with every passing hour, Admiral Zhang gave an order that would echo through Kethari nightmares for 1,000 years. "Persistence hunting authorized. Run them down." 3 days after the human fleet arrived, it was over. The Kethari war fleet, once 600 strong, had been reduced to less than 100 ships. Most of those had surrendered. The rest had fled to the edges of the system. Too damaged to fight, too afraid to leave, waiting to see what the humans would do next. On the surface, the last Kethari ground forces had been captured or killed. The survivors sat in makeshift prison camps, guarded by human soldiers who watched them with calm, patient eyes. They did not abuse their prisoners. They did not torture them. They simply watched and waited. And that was somehow worse. Supreme Commander Vex Torak had been captured on the second day. His flagship had been disabled by a precision strike that took out the engines without destroying the ship. Human boarding parties had cut through the hull and fought their way to the bridge, killing everyone who resisted and stunning everyone who did not. When they reached Vextorak, he had drawn his blade and prepared for a final stand. He was Kethari. He would die with honor. The human squad leader, a scarred veteran with gray hair and tired eyes, had looked at him for a long moment. Then he had holstered his weapon and sat down on a piece of wreckage. "You done?" he asked. Vextorak did not understand. "You can fight if you want," the human continued. "We will win, but you can make us work for it. Or you can put that down and come with us. Your choice." "You will execute me," Vextorak said. It was not a question. It was what he would have done. The human shrugged. "Probably not. The Admiral wants to talk to you. After that," he shrugged again. "Above my pay grade." Vextorak had surrendered. He did not know why. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps he was curious. Perhaps some small part of him wanted to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Now he stood in chains on the bridge of the human flagship, facing Admiral Helena Zhang. She was smaller in person than she had seemed on the view screen. Her hair was streaked with gray, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of long years and difficult decisions. She sat in her command chair, a cup of something hot in her hands, and studied him with an expression he could not read. "Commander Vextorak," she said. "Supreme Commander of the Kethari War Fleet, Conqueror of 11 worlds, Butcher of 17 civilizations." He said nothing. There was nothing to say. "I have been reading your file," Zhang continued. "You have killed a lot of people, Commander. Billions, probably. Most of them civilians. Most of them helpless." "I am Kethari," Vextorak replied. "We take what we want. It is our nature." "Funny thing about nature," Zhang said. She took a sip from her cup. "It can change." She stood and walked toward him, stopping just out of arm's reach. Even in chains, even defeated, Vextorak towered over her. He could have crushed her skull with one hand, but he did not move. Something in her eyes held him still. "You are wondering why you are alive," she said. "You expected execution. It is what your people would do. It is what any sensible species would do to a threat like you." "Yes," he admitted. "Here is the truth, Commander." Zhang's voice was calm, almost gentle. "We could exterminate your species. We have done the math. 30 years, maybe 40. And the Kethari would be a memory. Some of my officers recommended it. Said it was the only way to be sure you would never hurt anyone again." Vextorak felt his blood turn cold. He had known, in the abstract, that the humans were dangerous, but hearing it stated so plainly, so casually, made it real in a way it had not been before. "But that is not who we are," Zhang continued. "Not anymore." She reached up and touched the chains around his wrists. For a moment, Vextorak thought she was going to tighten them. Instead, she pressed a button, and they fell away. He stared at her. He did not understand. "We evolved as monsters, Commander," Zhang said. "Persistence predators, endurance hunters. We are very good at killing. We spent most of our history proving it, over and over again, first to ourselves and then to anyone who crossed us." She stepped back and returned to her chair. "But somewhere along the way, we learned something. Maybe it took us longer than it should have. Maybe we had to make a lot of mistakes first. But we learned it, and we have never forgotten." "What did you learn?" Vextorak asked. "Mercy is a choice," Zhang replied. "And it is a choice that only the strong can make. The weak cannot afford mercy. They are too busy surviving. But the strong, the truly strong, can choose to spare their enemies, can choose to show kindness instead of cruelty, can choose to build instead of destroy." She met his eyes. "We are strong enough to destroy you, Commander. And we choose not to." Vextorak stood very still. In all his years of conquest, no one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever shown him mercy and called it strength. "Go home," Zhang said. "Take what remains of your fleet and return to your empire. Tell them what happened here. Tell them the humans could have ended you and did not. And tell them that if you ever threaten another peaceful species again, we will not be so philosophical about it." She smiled, and there was something in that smile that was more frightening than any weapon. "We are very patient, Commander. We can wait a long time for you to make the wrong choice." Vextorak left the human flagship 3 hours later. His remaining ships limped out of the system, battered and broken, carrying survivors who would never forget what they had seen. Behind them, the human fleet remained in orbit around Verath Prime. They would stay for weeks, helping to rebuild, providing supplies, treating the wounded. They asked for nothing in return. High Chancellor Yurikza hosted a ceremony to thank the human forces before they departed. She stood before Admiral Zhang in the ruins of her capital city, surrounded by her surviving people and the human soldiers who had saved them. "Admiral," she said, "I must ask you something. Why did you come? We are strangers to you. You had never met us. You owed us nothing. Why did you answer our beacon?" Zhang was quiet for a moment. She looked out at the recovering city, at the Veloxi children who were watching human soldiers hand out food and medicine. She looked at the sky, where the smoke was finally beginning to clear. "Chancellor," she said at last, "we spent a long time as the scariest thing on our planet. And then, we spent a long time as the scariest thing in our corner of space. Do you know how lonely that is? Every species we met either ran from us or tried to contain us. They saw what we could do, and they decided we were too dangerous to be free." She turned back to Yurikza. "When your beacon activated, it was not just a distress call. It was the first time anyone in this galaxy asked us for help. Not feared us, not tried to lock us away. Asked us for help. Do you have any idea what that meant to us? To finally be needed instead of feared?" Yurikza looked at the Admiral. This small, soft-skinned creature who commanded death fleets and hunted monsters through the stars. She had expected to see a predator. Instead, she saw something else. She saw hope, and she saw loneliness, and she saw a desperate, ancient need to be seen as something more than a weapon. "Perhaps," Yurikza said slowly, "it is time the galaxy stopped telling stories about humanity. Perhaps it is time we started listening to them instead." Zhang smiled. It was a real smile this time, warm and genuine and touched with something that might have been gratitude. "I would like that, Chancellor," she said. "I think we all would." She extended her hand. It was a human gesture of friendship, Yurikza had learned. A way of showing trust by offering an empty hand that held no weapon. Yurikza reached out with one of her 4 hands and took it. Above them, the sky was clearing. The fires were going out. And somewhere in the distance, the first new buildings were beginning to rise from the ashes. The monsters had come to Vareth Prime, and they had chosen to be heroes instead.